It is fascinating. If what is true in there that JOOLA asserts, I think USA Pickleball is in big, big trouble. Here it is in 90 seconds, the whole 50-page brief. If you ever resubmit anything that even appears like you submitted in September, it will never be approved. He said, you don't get a runway when you cheat.
Okay, you guys know the show is sponsored by Therabody. Use my Theragun every day. Refresh and repair your body with Theragun Prime, the powerful percussive massage therapy device made simple for active lifestyles. Theragun's patented triangle grip allows you to reach more of your body than other devices. It's made from high-quality materials that withstand the rigors of daily use. Working with a Theragun massager is scientifically proven to relieve pain, reduce tightness, accelerate recovery, and improve circulation. Recover faster, play longer, get 10% off devices to reduce your risk of injuries with code 10DINK, or it's actually DINK10, all caps DINK10 at therabody.com. DINK10 at therabody.com for 10% off.
I was going to ask you guys, have you read the JOOLA claim? I spent an hour last night reading every page.
Like the actual class action lawsuit?
No, not the class action, the JOOLA claim as plaintiff against defendant USA Pickleball.
No, I didn't know it was public. Well, let's start there. Okay, so we're live. So this is a good starting point. You did a cram session of the suit. So give us the spark notes.
So you guys you haven't read the claim, right, Zane?
Nope.
It is fascinating. If what is true in there that JOOLA asserts, I think USA Pickleball is in big, big trouble. And I think it's in the best interest of both parties to settle this as soon as possible, relist the paddles, and really give the people what they want. You know, you and I can sit here all day, you guys, in an echo chamber of pro pickleball and say hot paddles are the devil. We want to ban hot paddles. It's not safe. But guess what's selling? Hot paddles. Behind the Gen 3, it's GearBox Pro. They can't keep them in stock, right? So I think if what JOOLA says is true in this claim, USA Pickleball is in hot water. Here it is in 90 seconds, the whole 50-page brief. In September, 2 base models of the Gen 3s were approved. In November, they submitted 9 similarity paddles. Now, do you guys know what you're allowed to change when you submit a similarity paddle?
Isn't it basically just graphics?
And shape.
It is.
Graphics and shape. So they submit 9 similarity paddles and they pass. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Those similarity paddles accidentally had a little bit of extra foam in them that did not match the 2 base paddles. However, JOOLA asserts that what was mass produced, sold, and manufactured didn't have the extra foam. But USA Pickleball is hanging their hat on those similarity paddles, had that extra foam, so we're delisting you and we're not giving you an 18-month runway, which in our own rules and regulations, we say you'll have an 18-month runway. There are text messages from Justin Maloof and Carl Schmitz, so that's the COO of USA Pickleball and the head of equipment and standards, saying to JOOLA, your paddles are too hot. Never did they say anything, oh, it's too much grit. It's too hot. And then when JOOLA asks, why did you fail our resubmission? They say too much grit, but they changed the grit standards as the claim asserts. So it really feels like, to me at least, when you read this 50-page brief, that USA Pickleball regretted ever passing the Gen 3s, period. Then tried to go back on a technical mistake and say, here's the reason we're hanging our hat. And Justin went so far as to write JOOLA and say, if you ever resubmit anything that even appears like you submitted in September, it will never be approved. Isn't that kind of self-indictment? They already approved it.
So have you ever been like a teacher?
No, why?
I feel like this is great. This is like you're teaching like a class right now. You sound like a professor.
It's amazing because I've had no caffeine and it's 6:30.
You got to teach Thomas what RZ is now.
No shot. I don't even want to learn. Well, that still doesn't tell us what happened to Ronbus and Vatic, though, correct?
Correct. And I wish I knew a little bit more about that.
Right.
That's one of the things I was going to ask is like, what are you hearing, right? You would assume that USA Pickleball is coming down on Ronbus, Vatic, and JOOLA for similar or the same reasons, but that's a very specific claim from JOOLA, the extra foam. It'd be unlikely that that was also the case for Ronbus and Vatic. So, what about those two paddles got them delisted?
Well, I can tell you that I spoke to a major manufacturer, ran into him last night waiting for the shuttle in San Clemente. He builds a paddle. And I said, well, what do you think about JOOLA not receiving their 18-month runway to delist? He said, you don't get a runway when you cheat. His words. And so that might be what's happening to Omni and Ronbus. JOOLA feeling like, hey, you're using foam and materials that we say you can't use. You're out. You don't get our good grace.
Mm-hmm. So it's material, but you're implying that it's materials that they knew they couldn't use.
I know that with the Ronbus, it's that. The Omni, I'm not familiar with what the reason behind the delisting.
Right.
So I don't put it past paddle companies to cheat with their pros. I don't see really how it would make sense for paddle companies to cheat with their amateurs, right? You want to create a great paddle. So are you buying this? Are you buying any of the USAP claims here or do you think that USAP realized they screwed up and came back on them with a technicality?
I think what's tough is they have the text messages, which in the claim, it literally shows them. And the text messages say, we have concerns. And this is days before JOOLA launched to the public. Days. Yes. We have concerns your paddles are too hot. And this is after the similarity paddles were approved, after the base models were approved, before they had any knowledge that there was extra foam in the similarity paddles. Yes. It wasn't about grit, but then failed them based on grit. They also failed them on saying, well, you used marketing to say that you have a trampoline effect, and that's against rule, 2EFG. But they knew all of that when they approved them. So don't approve them. Like JOOLA's sitting on 150,000 paddles that say USA Pickleball approved. And they sold how many hundreds of thousands have they already sold?
So when all this is going down, Jill, like we at the pro level are just feeling the impact of these Gen 3 paddles, like the GearBox, the JOOLA Gen 3s. Like we're obviously winding up a storm about how these paddles are changing the game at the pro level. And I think USAP caught wind of that after a while, right? They're usually and famously a little bit late to the party. What should they have done? Do you think that, let's just say in a vacuum, we're not worried about what happens between USAP, what happened between JOOLA? Like, do you think these paddles are good for the game or bad for the game? Without respect to any of the administrative proceedings of the certification.
No, we've been super vocal, at least on our podcast, about how bad I think these are for the game, how unlevel the playing field is in professional, how this is the asterisk era of pickleball, right? But all things aside, I mean, it's what the consumers want. And in a lawsuit, the absolute toughest thing to prove is damages. And JOOLA has damages. So let's really think of this. The claim that they have submitted is for $200 million, $100 million of punitive damages. If USA Pickleball has a 30% chance of losing this battle, that is immense exposure. That is bye-bye USA Pickleball.
Right.
And if they don't settle, what happens to JOOLA? Is that good? Do they go out of business? Are they okay? So I think this is going to get settled very quickly. And maybe it's hey, we're going to let you sell your stock and we're going to delist you in 1 year.
I mean, you have to imagine, I would really hope that USA Pickleball has some sort of liability insurance, right? Like, unless it gets into the...
No.
What, Tommy? You think
I was
no?
going to say you'd hope.
Yeah, you'd
hope they have something like that. That sounds like a unique... I mean, I'm sure they're... there's all sorts of insurance companies that will write policies all through the supply chain. So those policies exist. I don't know if it makes sense for USA Pickleball to get one of those policies versus like a paddle manufacturer. So like, what would that policy look like? Who would underwrite that? But you would assume that if they're going to be dealing with all these brands who have cash on the line, they would have some sort of policy in the case that something like this happens. However, I don't think they would ever foresee something like $100 million.
Yeah.
Right. But this has been boiling up for years, all the way back to the Prolite Apex paddle, where they submitted something. And yeah, this was back in 2018, 2019.
What's the Prolite Apex paddle? Tell me everything.
Yeah. So the Prolite Apex paddle came out in 2018, 2019, something like that. And this Wisconsin company, my buddy Neil Friedenberg runs it. And essentially they had a somewhat similar situation where they submitted this paddle. It was a pretty gritty paddle for the time, but it was before the Franklin Ben Johns paddle sort of set the standard for grit. The claim is, and this never went to court or anything, that Prolite submitted a paddle that was less gritty and sold a paddle that was grittier to the general public. I believe it got delisted. But we would have to confirm that. But it was the first case of basically a little bit of shady back and forth between paddle companies and USAP. This has been going on and getting more and more for a while. I didn't do a great job of explaining that first controversy. But
no, that's super interesting.
Look at this bad boy right here.
The funny thing is they resubmitted
$75
the exact same paddle, redid the design and called it the Covert, and got approved like 3 months later.
Did they name that ironically on purpose?
Yes.
The Covert?
Yeah. And so it was the exact same paddle.
If you Google Prolite Apex now, let's see, if you don't put in pickleball, it's trademarked. It's these sleeping pads here. So
But so okay, Jill, I think we all kind of agree that this paddle isn't good for the game. Not at the pro game. I think there are cases where it's probably fine in the amateur game. We've explained it before. I think, if you're in a 7-year-old ladies group, it can make the game more fun. But I don't really want like 35-year-old dudes hitting drives at me with these Gen 3s. So it's like, there's probably a time for this sort of technology, just like there's time for the diadem vice technology. You're USAP, you've approved these paddles, and you realize the impact that they are having on this game post approval. What do you do?
Well, so I was just going to say, here's point 43 in the brief that I think you'll find interesting. According to defendant, which is USA Pickleball, plaintiff's next generation paddles violated Rule 2E6F of Defendant's Equipment Standards Manual, which prohibited springs or spring-like material, flexible membranes, or any compressible material that creates a trampoline effect. In fact, defendant's managing director for equipment standards and facilities development, Carl Schmidt, wrote to plaintiff in an email on April 11th, right, guys? This is days before the JOOLA Gen 3s went live. He writes, "We appreciate your concern that these paddles have passed our existing tests at NTS, but we do contend, after conducting a teardown driven by concerns mentioned above, as well as a full case with facial deflection test, that the paddles violate Rule 2E6F, which will result in the withdrawal of certification of products with that feature." JOOLA writes, if defendant had concerns about the design of plaintiff's paddles, including the foam rim, the time to have raised those concerns was in September before approval of the base model, not 7 months later after plaintiff had manufactured over 150,000 paddles in reliance on the defendant approval of the base models. Sure. I agree with JOOLA here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not contending that JOOLA isn't getting hosed, right?
Yeah.
We have two problems here, right? USA Pickleball is absolutely hosing a company that got their paddle approved above board, but at the same time, this paddle is also in the worst
Wild.
interest for the game, right?
Agree.
So we are dealing with two different problems. I don't believe that YOLA is selling something different than what they got approved to the public. I don't see what they gain from that. But also those paddles are just, they're game breaking at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know if the GearBox Pro, like, so it sounds like the GearBox Pro is fine, right? Joe, you had mentioned that. I was playing
any
with
insight into why?
I don't know. Do you, Joe?
Because they started this whole thing. They were the first to come up with that proprietary foam sort of core.
Yeah.
And I still think that those GearBox paddles are just as poppy, if not poppier, than the YOLA Gen 3s.
They're the craziest paddles I've played. So we're in northern Michigan right now. Got a bunch of family here playing pickleball all the time. We invited the Club Pro. There's a club near here. We invited her over. She's got to be 60 something, right?
She hosed you.
She has like a very smooth, like soft swing, but she has figured out how to use this GearBox Pro in a way that the ball just flies off the paddle. And it's got like, it's weird. It's got like density to it coming off that paddle. And I mean, she was crushing us with it. I've never played against a paddle that's that powerful with such she would just do this smooth, methodical swing, and the ball would fly off the paddle. And she had really dialed it in. So, I mean, she was hitting these angles on like my little brother, who's 21 and who plays pickleball all the time, and like breaking his ankles. I'm like, how is this happening? It's just a testament to, like, if you have the right technology, how it can really give you a massive advantage. She's a great player, by the way, but she had clearly figured out how to dial in this paddle and use that power to hurt.
I have 4 of the Pro paddles, so I have it in the elongated and the Integra, and I think you guys are right. They're even better in a lot of ways than the Gen 3 YOLAs. I will say, I think they change quickly. Mm-hmm. So if you have funds to keep a fresh paddle in your bag like every month, I think that's the right play for you if you want a power paddle. But yeah, there's something about them that just changes.
I think it's odd generally that like a lot of paddles you have to like break in, right? There's almost this period of, okay, it's a fresh paddle, you got to play with it for a little bit, and then it will reach its form that you need to get used to. And it's like changing throughout the life of the paddle. I mean, what an odd thing, and what a complicated problem to have to tackle if you're USA Pickleball or the UPA-A. Like, I don't know how you deal with that without like regimented testing. And how would you ever regulate that in amateur? At a pro event, yeah, okay, you could set up testing facilities and you can test throughout, which is inconvenient in itself. But in an amateur event, in rec play, I mean, there's no way to prevent that.
Zane, do you ever get to test paddles, or is that against your Proxer contract?
Oh no, I try pretty much everything. I'm a little bit of a nerd with it. Yeah. I try a lot of paddles, and I do think like that, having tried both the Gen 3 YOLAs and the gearboxes, and maybe I just got a gearbox that was in its perfect time, I found the gearbox to be noticeably even more powerful than the YOLA Gen 3, which just like begs the question for me. That's been on the market for longer. It's been approved for longer. How is that escaping while we have YOLA's getting delisted, Vatic, and Omni, right? That's the biggest question I have now. What did they do differently? And if the problem... go ahead.
I want to see, like, is there a Freedom of Information Act? Can I email USA Pickleball? Because I want to see the companies that have been warned of the 18-month delisting. So we don't know that. I heard, gosh, I don't want to say who. I heard a pretty big company with a very hot selling paddle has been given their 18-month delisting window.
Yes.
It's not GearBox. I don't think GearBox has. But I think I would sure love to know and see that list. If it's publicly available.
I can't imagine it is. Some internet sleuth would have found that by now.
But how did GearBox get approved? I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to say, well, why is YOLA being punished when GearBox is just as hot?
So we are all in agreement then so Travis Rettenmeyer's doing this beers with Travis thing where he gets on Instagram and basically talks about the topics and gives his opinion. And I mean, we already touched on them. I mean, you called it the asterisk era. Travis was calling it the juicing era, right? Mm-hmm. Similar to baseball, but slightly different in that it's not about steroids or PEDs. It's about these paddles. And he was saying it's tough to determine if people are really good or it's just the paddle. And then he sort of posed the question, which we did earlier, which is like, will we look back on this time and put an asterisk next to most of these medals, right? Because we don't know whether it was the player or the paddle. And he said that the advantage is about as substantial as he's ever seen in sports. So I assume we're kind of all in agreement there. But when you guys, so you're in San Clemente right now, right? You guys are going to go play your matches very early. We got up early to do this podcast. You're welcome. It's way earlier for you guys. I think I'm 3 hours ahead of you, by the way, and it seems early for me. So props to you guys for showing up. But you guys are going to go play against these paddles later today. And when you're facing these paddles, is it that obvious? Is the advantage that severe?
I'll let you take it first, Jill.
I'll tell you what, that paddle tech paddle is something else too.
What's that?
That's at Hunter and Yates are playing that right now. I think I just played Julian Arnold yesterday, and it was hard for me to see his putaways. I mean, he's hitting the ball so hard. So yes, it is a massive advantage. But it's interesting when you hear that these hot paddles sell so much in the amateur space. Zane, you're an instructor. I'm an instructor. It's like, it's not the paddle I would put in most of my students' hands. But yes, when a professional has it and can control it, I think it's the massive advantage. Zane, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I think it depends on what's going to make the game most fun for the players. Like, I think these paddles are great for your 50, 60, 70-year-old ladies groups, right? And that's kind of about it. I think that helps make the game more fun for players who don't have a ton of power naturally. But I mean, playing against it's just not fun. If you took a normal 2022, if you took the toppiest paddle available in 2022, which is probably that Engage Pursuit, if I had to guess, or potentially the Onyx Evoke Pro. Any other things that come to mind there?
No,
maybe a GearBox even from back then, right? If you take 2022's poppiest paddle, I think these paddles are a third to 40% more popular.
Agree.
Which is wild. The game, the pace of the game is increased probably more than that, probably a good 50+%, because you're adding in players getting a little bit better on top of having these paddles that are now just naturally third poppier, to say the least.
Okay, so in the wake of all this with USA Pickleball, it's such bad timing for USA Pickleball with the UPA-A coming out, trying to establish themselves. And I think yesterday they came out with a statement. I mean, just to recap, right? We talked about it on last episode. Rob Nunnery had tweeted that brands would have to pay $100K per year and $5K per paddle for certification, like on an annual basis, starting in 2025, right? So
bye player sponsorships.
And there was pushback from Connor Pardo tweeting directly at me, Jason Aspis, kind of saying this is all speculation. Yesterday, they released a statement. Now, there's no indication of what the fees will be. I'm sure that will come down the road. They're still trying to imply that information that Rob leaked and we covered is untrue. I assume it'll just be slightly different when they finally release it. But they did kind of give an update on their testing. There's an interim policy. Again, no indication of the fees. But they've established a UPA certification program in partnership with Pro Pickle Labs. Or Pickle Pro Labs. It's not Pro Pickle, Pickle Pro Labs, which we already knew was like doing a lot of the testing for PPA. But then I think the most interesting thing was that PPA will collaborate with University of Massachusetts Lowell, renowned for its work with Major League Baseball on bat and ball testing. So looking into the history of this this testing center at UMass Lowell, the center was founded with a $400K grant from Major League Baseball itself back in the 2000s when they were going through their their own issue with like juiced bats, right? So UPA-A has said, all right, well, we're going to go to the people who have dealt with this before in a way bigger, more established sport in the spotlight. We're going to bring them in, and they're going to help us put together this testing policy. And that's what we're going to use going forward. So they're taking like aggressive steps to do the right thing and quell all of this, while USA Pickleball is still scrambling around. If UPA-A like really figures this out, who is ever going to go back to USA Pickleball knowing that they run the risk of their paddles being delisted retroactively, and there's no clarity on what is and is not legal? Meanwhile, we've got the UPA-A working with the same people who do Major League Baseball. So I just think like the timing could not be worse for USA Pickleball. And then on the statement, we're seeing an interim policy. I think we're going to see them come out with more information over the coming weeks or months with what's that going to cost the individual brands. But what's your take on this new statement from UPA-A?
I think you nailed it. And for the past year, right when PPL entered working with MLP, it was March, the Daytona event, I believe, Zane, for MLP, March of last year.
I think that was around the first time they started at PPA events. Or no. That was MLP, you're right.
Yeah.
I can't recall what MLP was doing before that, actually. But yeah, that was their first MLP, if I recall correctly.
I'll never forget, I was so impressed with these guys and what they're doing in the first deflection testing, not just core crush testing, not just delamination testing, not just grit. They actually had deflection testing. I remember going to Carl Schmitz because I was involved in too many paddle gates. And Carl Schmitz is the director of equipment and standards at USA Pickleball. And I said, oh my gosh, Carl, look, they have more advanced testing. Have you considered working with them, contracting them? And you would have thought I asked him to take his pants off. Yeah. He was so appalled. I mean, they really have their own testing standards as this like holy grail. So Thomas, I think they've had over a year to get on board with more advanced, optimized testing equipment. And they haven't wanted to do that. They've wanted to dig their heels in on kind of their antiquated processes.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like it's ego driven, right?
Yes.
God forbid we admit there's this other, group testing out there and they're testing better than we are. We're the preeminent testing and organizational body. Nobody can do it better than us.
Exactly. That was the attitude in the conversations I personally had with employees of USA Pickleball.
Yep. And I think, there was pushback on the fact that, I think UPA had mentioned that there was a board of different paddle brands who would help them with the certifications. A lot of big brands, right? No little guys. Who's looking out for the little guy? So Jason, in one of his tweets, said, "We heard you, and we've added Valer, Ace, and 60 to the Equipment Manufacturer Advisory Board." So, going out of their way to represent the little guy as well. Okay, I was playing in a PPA in Vegas with my little brother. We had gotten to, I think, the bronze match, and I pretty much had to throw in the towel because my calves started cramping like crazy. And all I was thinking was, I need some hydration mix. CorVive Hydrate is an advanced electrolyte drink mix designed to ensure optimal hydration, essential for maintaining nerve, muscle, could use that, and brain function. Probably could use that too. The Hydrate formula is NSF certified for sport, and it's free of artificial colors and sweeteners, with 4 times less sugar, important, and 3 times the electrolytes of grocery brands. The pure cane sugar aids in the efficient absorption of electrolytes, making it superior to water alone. Hydrate is used by more than 4 MLB teams And pink lemonade is available in stick packs or a tub. Use code PICKLE, all caps PICKLE, at CorVive.com to save 30% on your order.
Yeah, going back to the collaboration with UMass, I think that's pretty awesome. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, the extent of this collaboration and what exactly that means. But, I've been saying for a while, and I think everybody has, we need to actually test the outputs and not the correlated inputs of these paddles, right?
Yeah, not the materials.
We test grit as a proxy for the amount of spin that the paddle is going to get. We test deflection as a proxy for the amount of perceived power you're going to get. But companies are coming up with all these different ways to get more spin, get more power, and pass these tests. Really what we need is basically a mechanical arm that'll swing a paddle and have an upper limit of exit velocity, which I'm sure this is something that's available at UMass. And that mechanical arm swings a paddle and gets an upper boundary of spin on it. And so once we actually are policing the outputs for certification, that's great. It still is going to be impossible to police that on site, right? Are you going to be bringing, let's say I bring a juiced paddle to the PPA.
I'm bringing my robot.
You're bringing your robot? Yeah,
I'm bringing my robot. He's going to swing that paddle.
But the thing is, so this is going to be great for preemptive certification going forward, this collaboration with UMass. How do we still police that it's not solving the problem of, is what's submitted to UPA the same as what Jill and Zane are playing on court?
Well said.
Right?
Well said.
And that still remains a huge problem, because for a long time, even with the USAP standards, you submit something to USAP, you give something different to your pros. That problem isn't really addressed unless somehow or another we get the challenge system back.
Challenge system. I was just going to say that. Yep.
And it's got to have enormous consequences for both the brand and player if something is found to be illegal. I think that's the only way to actually, I think you can't quite test it. I think you have to deter it.
I agree.
Well, what was the fine to Andre? Was it 50?
50K and 6 months or a year probation, I believe.
That's a good start. Obviously, again, it was for the substance. So I think it was weird that it happened in that circumstance, but that's the type of punishment that needs to be levied to prevent brands from, trying to skirt the rules. Right. So I could see that being an even bigger fine. So, I think that was the right move. Right. And then, Zane, you had kind of mentioned that you thought, let's just say what Nunnery had tweeted, right? There's going to be these big certification fees for the brand and for the individual paddles, right? Like per SKU is what somebody said. I'm not, again, it's speculation. They haven't come out with it officially at this point. But Zane, I liked that you had kind of brought up the take of, I think it's better that they raise the barrier to entry. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, well, real quick, I want to go back to Jill. You were shaking your head when I was talking about, or when we started, we brought up Andre. Do you have something you want to share on that?
I just can't believe that punishment. Just every time I hear it, $50,000.
Do you think the suspension or the fine is worse?
The fine. I mean, what other sport is fining someone a third of their salary? I'm guessing. I haven't talked to Andre about what he's making, but it's probably close to that.
But I think what's going to happen, I think this will set a precedent. I would assume that moving forward, Jill, you just signed a new contract. Did you talk to Gamma about having some sort of protection against if you get fined in that way, where they cover the fine?
I'll tell you the opposite's in my Gamma contract. That if I misrepresent our brand, if I'm caught doing something like that, that's a material breach and I'm out. We have a real strong moral character clause.
But if it cut, but like so let's just say in Andre's case, it was because the paddle had changed over time, right? Something out of his control. He gets fined the 50 grand. His sponsor should pay that. And I think that's what should be the case moving forward.
For him, I hope that is. But I just did not feel that punishment fit the crime. If there was a crime, which it sounds like there might have been. There are a few different stories. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah. Well, briefly, the way that I felt about it was that but there's also other crimes of too much grit, too much.
Exactly.
So the way that I see it is a paddle failed. I don't care what the paddle fails for.
I agree.
One substance is the most clear example of attempting to cheat. I think if Andre was attempting to cheat, it was also the dumbest possible example of.
Yeah.
So the way that I see it at the end of the day is a paddle failed and it got caught by testing, and testing did its job, actually.
Its job. I agree.
To go such a huge departure from what happens when a paddle fails. I've had paddles fail. I'm sure you've had paddles fail. Everybody on the Pro Tour now is having paddles fail. Nobody's getting fined for it other than this time because there's something different about it. But that's the short, not the summary.
And, I don't know if you know these players, but I've known players who, as soon as they get their paddle passed, they're out hitting a lacrosse ball against it before their match. Yeah. They're trying to get it to degrade as quickly as possible. I mean, these paddles go from smart, but also cheating, right? But it's Andre getting the punishment for it. So it's
against the rule F712G. Don't hit a lacrosse ball with your paddle.
Yes.
I'm gonna
sorry, what was your question again? I wanted to go back to Jill real quick on that.
Hold on, I have to mention something before we get away from it. So the guy who's named in the class action lawsuit against JOOLA, right? We had brought him up because of some speculated affiliation with Phantom. Apparently not the case. He was like an ambassador or whatever, right? But that's not really anything official. In a recent tournament, there's videos of him playing in the tournament, and I think he like medaled with a JOOLA, with a Perseus. And then for the podium picture, or like the pictures afterward, he like held an engaged paddle, just so there was nothing online of him like playing with the paddle of the company he's leading a class action lawsuit against. So I just had to mention that because I thought it was.
Wait, so how do you know he was using the JOOLA paddle to begin with? There's a video of it?
Yeah, I have videos of it.
That's amazing.
That's wild.
I kind of like this guy. He's just.
Yeah, we got a bunch of messages from them and the manufacturer.
Right. Yeah. But okay, so going back to the kind of raising the barrier of entry, assuming these fees for certification are going to be implemented down the road. I was initially of the mindset you're going to squeeze the little guy, like it's going to stop innovation. It's going to stop new entrants from coming into the market. There's a lot of new brands who are making waves and making progress very quickly. I think that's great for the sport, for new people to come in and try and innovate within it. And I thought that these fees meant that, these startups don't really, they're going to be at a significant disadvantage. But Zane, you were mentioning that raising the barrier to entry was actually a good thing. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that again, and then get Jill to respond or give her opinion on that.
Yeah, so I actually had a brief conversation with Connor a couple of days ago, and it sounds like there's going to be multiple classifications of paddles, right? UPA-A can certify paddles for everyday use for amateurs and whatnot, and then there's going to be a higher class of paddle certification for pro play. So the little guys and the dollar amount, I mean, I'm assuming is going to be substantially different between the pro certified paddles and the amateur certified paddles. So the little guys can still grow themselves through the smaller certification. They just can't get their paddles certified for pro level, which I think the amount of paddles that you do have to worry about at the pro level is too much, right? I think you see with the USA Pickleball having to deal with I don't know, tens of thousands of paddle submissions per year. It's just too much for them to deal with. I'd rather see focused and better testing on 100 different paddles over the course of the year and making sure that we're getting the thing correct for the pro game. So I think a barrier to entry there, just for the fact of giving UPA-A less paddles to take a look at, I do think that's actually a good thing, because then you can't have some random paddle come through, slip through the cracks that is game breaking for a period of time.
I agree. I wish we actually agreed on less things. I think it might make for a more spicy podcast, Zane. We're gonna come up. I'll come up with something we disagree on. I promise.
I'm ready to argue. I'm ready to argue.
Okay. All right. Well, how about this? I think along this topic, there's really going to be 5 or 6 paddle brands, major, left standing in like 2 to 3 years. We're already seeing equipment sales demonstrably down from where they were last year. A lot of people ask, is pickleball in a bubble? I don't think pickleball participation is. I don't think facility creation is, or viewership, but I do think equipment specifically around paddles is. And I think we're going to see
on that. Well, yeah, like, where's that coming from?
Yeah, you said demonstrably.
Do you think it's not? I think JOOLA helps, right, with all the sales of the JOOLA paddles. But when I was at Gamma headquarters, we were talking about Dick's, Target, Walmart, at those big box retailers. We're seeing a little bit of cannibalization. And I think we're going to see in 2 to 3 years, there's like 6 brands left standing. Just like golf, guys. This is exactly what happened with golf clubs. So here are the brands that I think are going to be left standing. I think we're going to see, hopefully, and maybe JOOLA, Selkirk, Franklin, Proxor, Paddletech, and that umbrella, Gamma, and GearBox. Companies that have been around long enough to have their ties into these big box retailers, like a Dick's, like a Target, like a Walmart. And I think this is going to go the absolute way of golf equipment. And so how does that relate to what we were just talking about? I think you're right, Zane. I think these companies with a little bit more resources that can take this a little more seriously. You and I know everyone and their mom is starting a paddle company right now. So I think that certification from UPA will be good.
Yeah. I think if you look at any sport, you name me a sport where you can name 10 brands that manufacture the primary equipment, right? It's typically a handful of names. They're household names, and those are the ones who dominate the market. It's very unique in pickleball that we have so many different brands, right?
Right.
And it seems like every month we're talking about some new brand or paddle nobody's ever heard of.
Exactly. And
well, I would guess. Oh, go ahead, Jill.
Well, I would just say when I say equipment is down, actually equipment is up. Consumables are up, grip, balls, bags. But when someone buys a paddle, you have to remember the majority of people are playing that paddle a lot longer than we are, or a lot longer than your like really diehard rec player is. So I think that we sold a ton of paddles last year. And right now we're seeing some businesses really hurt. Like, what's going on with Engage? They kept 5 of their pros, let go of everyone else.
Not a clue. Yeah, not a clue. So it's interesting you say that. Like, I mean, I wonder, Dick's and Target, the big boxes, might be down. But when I bought my first tennis racket, it was from Dick's. When I bought any other tennis racket my entire tennis career, it was not from Dick's. It was directly from the manufacturer, right? It seems like that's the spot that you'd go to get your beginner paddle, which would make sense in 2021, 2022, 2023. People are buying their very first paddle. I wonder if that paddle sales, I wonder if they're moving on in their pickleball trajectory and going directly to manufacturers now. So I don't doubt that like paddle sales from Dick's and Target are down. I am skeptical with the continued growth and participation. I think they're just moving through the player life cycle and more towards those specialized paddles. Or at least that's the optimistic part in me.
The good news is there's data on all of this. I'll dig it up.
All right, love it. Let's go.
Okay. Eyewear has been a hugely hot topic in pickleball lately, especially with these hot paddles. Tifosi is the Italian word for superfan, and that is exactly who they make their eyewear for. Tifosi Optics designs sunglasses that allow you to get out and live your passion. Their glide technology allows the frame to slide on comfortably and provides an anti-bounce fit with an integrated hinge, ensuring these sunglasses slide on easily without pulling your hair. Crafted from shatterproof polycarbonate, these lenses not only reduce glare, but also offer scratch resistance, ensuring unparalleled eye protection. Shop now at TifosiOptics.com and save 20% with code DINK20. That's all caps DINK20, TifosiOptics.com.
Olokai, a Hawaiian-inspired lifestyle brand best known for their insanely comfortable sandals. Pickleball shoes that are actually for pickleball. The Anau is designed specifically for pickleball with a focus on airy breathability, lateral stability, multi-directional traction, and comfort both on and off the court. They feature a non-marking sole for indoor and outdoor pickleball courts with a design inspired by cauliflower coral that is found throughout Hawaii's ocean waters. The purchase of every Olokai product gives back to Hawaiian nonprofits. Visit the link in the description and try a pair for yourself. They kind of came out of nowhere in the pickleball scene. I started seeing them all over Instagram, and the stuff looks pretty cool. Like, it's some coralish color, like they mentioned, cauliflower coral. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I think the navy shoes are pretty cool. There's not many pickleball shoes I'd actually wear. These ones are actually pretty stylish.
All right, Jill, walk me through this Fab Five debacle.
What do you guys know? What have you
I don't know a
heard?
lot. I haven't been following it. I only started looking into it once you mentioned it. So
Zane, have you heard anything about what went down with the 5 women re-entering the waiver wire shuffle draft? I don't even know what to call that period. I just call it the period of madness in my life.
But we'll argue about this. I don't think you should have been let back in MLP. Not you personally.
Just me or the other girls too.
Not you personally. No. But we'll talk about that. That is nothing. I don't think you did anything wrong. But
okay, you guys, I've been a part of a lot of MLP madness. I was CEO of Duper, and I was chief of staff at Major League Pickleball, one of the earliest employees there. Been a part of a failed merger, and then witnessed a completed merger as a pro player. Like, I've seen a lot, and that 24 hours of the waiver wire was nuts. Like, mind game, mental madness. So the Fab Five, which is Megan Fudge, Yana Newell, Susanna Barr, Bobby Oshiro, and myself, re-entered. But did we re-enter something? There wasn't a draft. Like, there wasn't an application process. So it was more like whispers of coming back in. It was free agency, or so we all thought. But at the same time, if you say no to a team that calls your name during the waiver wire, you are not allowed to say yes to another team. So began this crazy 24-hour period of trying to convince some owners not to say your name while speaking to other owners who are offering you cash, like $50,000 to come back in. Like, these were amazing offers to come back in and play. So the night before the waiver wire for Challenger commenced, we were all set. I knew where I was going to play. Megan knew she was going to go to Chicago Slice. Bobby knew she was going to Miami. Everything was set. And then MLP or UPA execs text the team owners, under no circumstances will you pay these girls $1.
So what do they want to happen instead? What's the alternative?
That we play for the prorated, like $10,000 expense reimbursement amount.
So this $50,000 that was, somewhat agreed to by some of these agents was outside of that. That's going from the pocket of the team to the player and not through the hands of Major League Pickleball. It's a side deal.
Well, MLP wants to process the payment, but yes, the funds would have went from the team to MLP, and then MLP would have processed the payment.
Oh, interesting. And MLP said, we're not going to process that payment.
Will not, under any circumstances. They're just going to get their like prorated expense reimbursement.
I kind of agree with that.
Zane, now we have something to really, really argue about.
Let's argue. I'm ready. So I don't think you guys should have been allowed to play.
Okay. Why should we not have been allowed to play?
Yeah. So it made a huge advantage. So you guys are all probably, like, you could make the argument that Megan, Susanna, you would have been in the talking for Premier, right? Like, you guys are all very well could have been picked in that Premier draft. If not, you would have been almost undoubtedly first round challenger picks, right? Mm-hmm. And so with teams that are towards the bottom of the standings, they are now, like, if you're looking at Chicago now has Megan Fudge, who they probably would have picked first overall in the challenger draft if she was available. So they have the first overall pick or second overall pick in Jack. They now have the what would have been, like, let's say unarguably top 5 pick, and I think it creates pretty big imbalance for the teams that have done well so far, especially when you're playing for promotion into Premier League. So I think it's absolutely right for you guys to fight and want to play. If that's something that you want, I don't think you should have been allowed to.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting argument. I think what's fascinating about MLP is we need to keep those narratives going, those interesting storylines where it's like, now you have players in Challenger you could argue should be in Premier, and you've got players in Premier you could argue should be in Challenger. And I think that's how it should be, a lot of movement. And, you know, if Megan does great the next couple events, if I do great the next couple events, if anyone does, it's like, do we get traded up to Premier? Those are interesting storylines. Elise Jones coming down to Challenger in a $100,000 blockbuster trade involving Vivian Glozman. Like, that's a fascinating storyline. Jeff Nguyen drafted Vivian Glozman. That's why he traded picks from 9th to 3rd at the very first in the draft at the beginning of the year. He did that on purpose because he knew Vivian would be an extraordinarily strong trading chip. He told her on the day he drafted her, I am going to trade you. Watch. And that, of course, is great for her. I mean, she goes up to Premier. So I think that we're seeing some of these team owners who are savvy and forward thinking being rewarded. And I think it's cool storylines. So I do appreciate your viewpoint, but I also think the narrative is exciting, and Challengers just got an upgrade.
I don't disagree there. I think it's certainly an interesting talking point. And I think that you guys were right to fight for your ability to play. If I'm sitting at 6th on the waiver wire pick, though, because I've been performing well, my team, I'm the GM of one of the teams that's higher on the standings. I'm pissed. I'm pissed that I've basically punished for doing well so far.
Well, and so some teams were really pissed. So, like the Atlanta Bouncers, right? They were like, well, this is crazy. I want one of these 5 girls. They don't want to play for me. You know what? I'm just going to call Bobby Oshiro's name. And my agent says to them, like, don't do that. That's really dumb. She's going to say no to you. Don't do that. She wants to play for Miami. And they're like, we don't care. We're going to do it. And so then Miami finds out and goes, we're going to call Jill Braverman's name. And my agent goes, don't do that. That's really dumb. She's not going to play for you. And he goes, yeah, but then we'll just remove a piece from the board because Atlanta's screwing us with Bobby. So it was like, then Jeff at the last second from Bay Area Breakers trades picks to make sure that didn't happen. So it was just like a lot of mind games at the very last second.
Can you take us through this? So so the number 1 pick went to, it was
Black Bears, right?
Black Bears, right? It was Black Bears. They took Susanna.
Which is interesting because Richie called me the day before the waiver wire and goes, so would you play for the Black Bears? And I'm like, well, Richie, no, now that it's for free, like, no, I'm not playing for any team for free. because I really didn't want to go to the Black Bears. So it's like I had to come up with some like talking points too, you know?
Mm-hmm. So which teams did you ended up on the Aces? Is that right?
Bay Area Breakers.
Oh, sorry, you're on the Breakers, who gutted their whole team basically.
Third in the standings, got the team.
Yeah. So did you end up on the team that you wanted?
Yes.
And how
and that's the thing. All these women were jockeying the whole 24-hour period to end up where they wanted to end up.
Did anybody get screwed? Did anybody end up where they didn't want to end up?
I think everyone ended up where they wanted to end up, but it took a lot of back and forth and like telling some team owners you just weren't going to play for them. You'd say no, which is a gamble, right? Like Miami was like, we're going to say Jill's name and then hold her ransom and sell her to Bay Area. They just made $100,000 trading Vivian. They'll pay us for Jill. So there was also this, like, all the teams wanting to strengthen their balance sheets, which is something Jeff was able to do in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. I think it's right for some of those teams that were towards the end of the waiver wire picking to be kind of pissed. It definitely changes the entire balance of Challenger having 5 first-round picks suddenly enter the chat.
And for the teams that made no changes, like, how do they fare? Even in Premier, right? Like, historically, Zane, would you say, and Thomas, like, when you make no changes, doesn't really go well?
Unless you drafted well to begin with, right?
Let me rephrase. The teams that make no changes who aren't doing well, like,
right,
things just don't magically improve. Or do you, like, that's how I feel, but how do you guys feel?
I think there's a case of also just you felt like you underperformed, right?
Yeah, and I think previous years you were looking at different time horizons. Like you're looking last year, you're only playing for 6 months. If you're not doing well, you got to fix it now. Now you have, all right, so and so isn't playing great, but we knew there were a pick that we were hoping was going to develop, and we're going to re-sign for our 3 years or whatever. So there's more pressure to make a lot of moves previously, I think, because there's less time to figure it out. Each season of MLP last year had 3 events, right? So doesn't work well right away, change it. If that doesn't work well, okay, you got 1 more event, suck it up.
Yeah.
So, but the interesting thing is you guys are now only playing for your teams through the rest of this year. So a handful of more events, and you cannot be re-signed by the same team. So Jill, with you, or I'm sorry, you can be re-signed, but you go into basically a free agency pool, right?
Yes, exactly.
Do you have any understanding of what that's going to look like next year?
Well, I think my inclination is some of these girls came back under a unspoken or unwritten, I should say, condition that, hey, if I facilitate bringing this team to Premier, I want to be kept. I want to figure out a way to make that happen. Because like, as one of these Fab 5 pointed out to me, why would I go back in for free, help my team get to Premier? I didn't say this. Help my team get to Premier and then get rewarded by staying in Challenger.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a fair sort of understanding, I suppose. Gentlewoman's agreement.
Right. I think there's some gentlewoman's agreements happening. Sorry, was that your question?
I don't remember, but it was a good answer.
Oh, it was what happens after this year, because we're going to be free agents. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I think all the jockeying behind the scenes, Jill, like what you were just describing, what you're saying to different owners and the sort of the back channel communications, like we need to do a better job of telling that story. That stuff is so interesting. Part of the issue, though, is even if you do tell that story, there's so few people that understand the nuances and the intricacies of what can and cannot happen and how all of this works, that we're kind of fighting 2 battles. One is shine a spotlight. The other is help people just understand what is even going on.
Totally.
Right?
Totally. No, you nailed it. I mean, I think too, in this case, it would have made, I think, everyone look a little foolish because no one understood the rules.
Even, yeah, I mean, it's clear that even some of the players and the owners don't understand the rules.
I think the executives were clarifying and writing them on, as we were going.
I think the executives were figuring it out on the fly too. I don't think this is something that was foreseen. It's like, oh shit, we got to figure this out now. Yeah. So Jill, I want, if you haven't done this already, I want a step-by-step breakdown of this Fab Five thing on your podcast. What's your podcast called? I always call it the Jilly D podcast.
Yeah, me too.
TPL. This Pickleball Life. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. With my better half, K-Dubs, who I'm so naked without, and it is June 26th date is our anniversary.
Oh, no way. Yeah. Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And how long are you
bring you a coffee for the anniversary? It's a nice gesture.
3 years together at 8 or 9.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Congrats. Yeah. That's awesome.
Thank you.
We're honored to have you on on your anniversary.
On her birthday and on her anniversary, and I'm sure you'll do the same for Jenny. So yeah, birthdays, anniversaries, any major holiday. Always playing a pickleball tournament. Happy birthday, happy anniversary. You get to come watch me play pickleball. Right, Zane?
That's how it goes. Hey, when you're playing 30 weekends a year, it's a small chance it's going to work out properly. But so yeah.
Zane, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What does MLP feel like? Because before I entered this waiver wire period, I was playing with a couple premier players training in SoCal. And I was like, yeah, I'm thinking about re-entering. And they're like, don't. I was like, why not? And I go, they're just glorified PPA events, but not even really glorified. They're worse. Like, is that MLP magic gone?
It's kind of hard for me to say because I only played 3 matches with the Fives in Atlanta and we were off for DC. So I have a smaller sample size than anybody. I would say Atlanta in September of 2023 when I was with the Squeeze was probably the coolest Major League Pickleball event to date, other than potentially the first one in Arizona in 2023. Those were 2 of the top. The energy was just something else. I do think it's a little bit strange not having a winner of each weekend. Yeah. And I know that we want this to be a little bit more like a regular season, but I think an interesting way to do it would be to have 4 sort of sections. You've got the Southeast, the Northeast, maybe the Central and the West. The West division plays their entire thing and they have a champion of that weekend. And the same thing with the Central, Southeast, Northeast. That way you could actually have sort of a tournament feel on each weekend where you do crown a winner and you have all the teams playing in closer to their local markets. And I think that would be an interesting change down the road. And it was actually something that was discussed previously, having these sort of pods and weekend tournaments where you're only having 6 teams at a time play. We didn't end up doing that. But so to answer, it's Atlanta of this year did not feel like Atlanta MLP of last year. And I wasn't at DC, but I did hear that DC seems to go phenomenally in terms of attendance, right? There's a lot going on, a ton of people there. So I don't know. What are your thoughts having just watched so far?
I mean, Thomas, you saw the stream, right? I mean,
it looks like a different product. It looks like a JV product. It looks like, I mean, you think about it, it's owned by the same entity. Most of the people who are making the decisions for that new co. The PPA is their baby. MLP they hated for so long. And now that they're both in one, yes, they're going to put on the MLP events, but are they really going to prioritize them? Are they really going to hope that this becomes a flagship product over their baby, the PPA? Unlikely.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that reflected even in the on-court presentation, the production, and everything, right? So
yeah.
There's no true like fully pro MLP stakeholder that has the ability to make true decisions. And I think we're seeing that. I think that's reflected in the product.
These two premier players with whom I was practicing the other weekend went as far as to say they're trying to kill it.
I mean, I've heard that, and I wouldn't, they're going to kill it slowly, right?
Yeah.
They're not just going to pull the plug, or they're going to wait for that moment where they say, hey, this is losing money. Viewership is not moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And then they'll pull the plug and they'll make a business decision. They'll have a reason for it. But they're going to slowly drain it until it gets to that point. And then we'll just have the PPA live on.
Yeah. I think that's feasible. I don't know though. I haven't played in it. So
Jill, why did you hold out in the first place? And then why did you decide you want to come back?
I mean, that's a great question. I think when the Fab five women all decided to hold out, we were really unsure of the schedule. Were these going to conflict with APP events? I don't know if you guys know this, but the APP doubles all of your prize money if you play all 12 of their events. So from a financial perspective, it's just way more lucrative to make sure that our attendance is at those APP events versus an MLP event. And then we'd be adding all of those MLP events to our schedule, which is already packed. And we would have been doing that for free.
Right.
Which is why it was so interesting when during this waiver wire period, it was like, oh, well, do you want to come back? And you could actually be compensated for your time. Does that make sense or no?
Yeah, except for like why did you want to come back? Because now you had clarity on the schedule. You figured you could make it work, and it's another opportunity to go out there and make money and compete.
A lot of these events are Tuesday, Wednesdays, which I don't think which was not clear. And at least for my, or not clear at the time of making these decisions. And for my team, I have no conflict with the APP. And then I also feel like this is my only opportunity to go premier. I've got a huge chip on my shoulder, you guys. Come on. Everyone was congratulating me last July. Oh, you're going to go premier. You won MVP of Challenger. Turns out I didn't go premier. So, I got something to prove. I got to earn my way in, you guys. So I think Bay Area is my shot to earning my way in. And yeah, ego-driven decisions usually don't go well, but my ego's in this one, you guys.
Gotcha. Love it.
Got it.
Like Zane, you made a huge mistake drafting Rachel Rohrabacher when you could have drafted. You only won like 2 championships out of 3.
I know. Well, I pride myself to sleep with that. You can blame blame Anna. I wanted you, Jill. I wanted you.
No, obviously you guys crushed it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's going to be pretty cool. I actually think for these players in Challenger, I think this is again a really cool storyline and an opportunity to say, look, I led this team to Premier and we got promoted. And I think that's something people are sleeping on. Like Elise getting dropped down is like, obviously, like I'm sure it's not anything any Premier player wants, but like it can light the fire and show like, look, I'm good enough. I am going to bring this team back up to where we belong in Premier. And I think that that's going to be a very, very interesting storyline throughout the course of this year. In terms of, what you've mentioned of it seems like MLP being not prioritized. I do think that the streaming situation is very, very strange. Like in Atlanta, not having a couple of the matches streamed seems very dumb to me. In an effort to cut costs, that seems to be the worst way of doing it. Not streaming a match. You're already paying for all of the players to be there, all of the coaches, all of the staff. Adding the incremental 2 hours of streaming on top of that seems like a no-brainer for the content. That's a decision that really surprised me. I do think that there are enough of these owners, hopefully, I'm hoping there's enough of these owners. If MLP is getting the short end of the stick, somebody's got to stick up for it, I think. But who knows? And who knows if that's actually, happening. It might feel that way, but MLP is under a lot of changes, right? It could just be figuring stuff out early on in the year. We'll hope.
I mean, even just as like a really, this is small and maybe insignificant, but like look at the PPA YouTube channel. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Every weekend they get millions of views on their YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
The thumbnails are great. The production is great. Major League Pickleball is posting their matches as well, but it's just different. It just looks like it's a second thought.
Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to do it, so they do it, versus UPA is really optimizing to make YouTube like a true channel for them where they can reach a new audience, bring in viewers, further monetize it. If they're doing millions of views on multi-hour videos, I mean, they're probably making good money on that as well.
Yeah.
There's a way to offset costs. Hey, Major League Pickleball, can you guys like figure out your YouTube channel and start making money on that? And then you can pay for another 2 hours of streaming. But I think that like that's just one small example, but you can kind of extrapolate that out, and it seems to be a theme across Major League Pickleball. There's just sort of this, it's like half-assed in many ways, and I think it's because there aren't true stakeholders within the organization caring and thinking, and maybe they're just at capacity worrying about these other things, right? And they can't get to it. But I don't know. It just seems like a second-tier product relative to the PPA right now.
All right.
All right. I think we can wrap there. That was a nice natural pause, and you guys got to go get over to the courts. So Jill, thanks for coming on. We didn't get to a lot of stuff, so let's have you back on. We've got a long list of things I'm sure you have opinions on, and yeah, I'm a fan of listening to your teacher voice, especially with the setup you got. It's you're really outdoing Zane and I on our own show right now.
100%.
No, you guys did amazing. You always do. I think you guys are
amazing.
such a fair and unbiased perspective in the sport. I love listening to you guys. So no, thanks for having me on. Love to do it again.
Cool.
Jill, I want that step-by-step Fab 5 breakdown on this Pickleball life, if you haven't done it already.
It was so wild.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, dollar has gonna